Okay, and we had a little bit of a hiatus, and now we're back. I will look at the chat at the end, not at the end, at the end of my prologue, I guess is what I should say. At the end of my prologue, I'll look at the chat. I'll answer questions then. Okay, we're going to talk about fear today, and the paradox of fear, and the different misconceptions we have about fear. And I thought of this one the other day when I kept hearing the phrase, fear is not real. I guess it's a t-shirt too. Fear is not real. Fear is not real. So it got me thinking about a big misconception about fear, which is that fear is not real, which is not true. Fear is real. Fear is as real as every other emotion that we have. But because there's such a bad fixation on fear, it's one emotion that gets discounted, right? It's the one thing people don't want to admit they're afraid of anything. People don't want to admit that they're feeling fear because there's all of this judgment around fear. What people fear, what they don't fear, why they fear it, why they don't fear it. There's so many different misjudgments on fear. Okay, so everyone kind of creates this wall about fear. That, I'm not afraid of anything. When in truth, our bodies are riddled with fear. You cannot live in a human body without fear. It's 100% what makes up your human DNA. It's built on fear. That's all it is. Because fear is a precursor to control. We try to control everything in our reality. Our human aspect, all it's going to ever do is try to control, okay? And the only reason it does that because it fears something. If you don't have any fear, you don't try to control anything, which is why fear is one of the last things we do clear, along with judgment. It's one of the last things that will go out of our body, but it takes so many clearings on fear to get to the end. I don't know if you ever get to the end of any of it, because there's just so much there. There's just so many things that we don't want to admit that we are afraid of. Death is a huge one. You see that all the time, where people are so afraid to die. So we do everything we can to try to control that. And when we're talking about control, you're always doing that from your human aspect. Your soul does not try to control everything. It doesn't need to control anything because it's predestined everything in a sense. It doesn't have any need to control. None of your higher aspects are going to try to control the outcome on anything. That's only what your human aspect is going to do. Okay, so if you're trying to control something, look at the fear you have around that. There's something you fear happening if you don't control it, right? There's something you don't want to happen. So you're trying to do everything you can to manipulate. And that's a good test to try to take out the word control and put in the word manipulate. Because what you're really doing is you're trying to manipulate your surroundings. You're trying to manipulate exactly what you're doing because you don't want something to occur. So when we start trying to break down fear, it's important to remember every time you embody in your soul, every time you bring in more of yourself, because in the beginning, your soul, when you start your awakening, your ascension process, the soul is always outside the body. Your soul isn't in the body. There's pieces of your soul in the body, but the majority of your soul is not in the body. And the whole part of ascension is to bring that in, to bring in your soul, to embody that in. That's when we talk about embodiment. That's really all we're talking about. It's just embodying in the part of your soul that is not being housed by the body. Now, when we start to do that, that's when we have a lot of things start to go awry, because the human body was not built in a sense to hold all that. It's not meant to hold all that. So as the soul enters in the body, and this happens gradually over what your human aspects is gonna see as linear time, it's gonna start to see it coming in over linear time. Because as it does enter in the body, it starts to break down all that fear. Because no matter what frequency you're embodying, no matter which aspect of your soul you're embodying, and there's more than just one aspect, a lot of times when I talk about it, I try to keep it simple and we talk about the soul and the human aspect because it's just an easier easier way to get the point across. It's an easier way to talk about it. But there's so many aspects of your soul. And there's a lot of different facets of your human existence too, and your human aspect. It's not really just one human aspect. There's a lot of different facets of that. That's why a lot of different people represent a different facet of your human aspect too. And that of your ego aspect. It's not just the one thing. So no matter what frequency you're trying to embody in, what facet of your soul you're trying to embody in, you're going to have to release whatever is not that frequency. So the minute you start releasing what is not that frequency, then that can trigger a lot of fear. So that triggers panic attacks. That triggers sometimes, heart palpitations. It can trigger a lot of different things, and it's just releasing fear. And the more fear you release, the higher your vibration can go, and then you're just in that never-ending, in a way, circle, releasing more fear, doing something else, releasing more fear. And now I'm going to be able to raise to a different vibration. Now I'm going to embody in something else, and I'm going to release more fear. Every step of your ascension journey is going to cause you to jump through fear. It's going to cause you to go through fear. So I never want people to act like it's not there. What we want to do when we start looking at fear, we can acknowledge we feel the fear. And we want to feel the fear. You want to get the fear out of your body. We don't want to say, oh, it's not there. Oh, I'm going to ignore the fear. It doesn't exist. All it does, it keeps it stuck in the body. It never really releases when we're kind of in that mindset, well, it really doesn't exist. What doesn't exist is the story we have around the fear. That's what we want to look at. What is our story? If we fear death, which a lot of people fear death, what's your story about that? I remember I was listening to one discussion once where this guy was talking about how he was so afraid to die. And when he started talking about dying, he had this very gruesome death, this very gruesome death playing out in his mind. And that was his story around that fear that was releasing. The story around it was that very gruesome ending, So when you start releasing the fear, start looking at the story you have around the fear. Start looking at, wait a minute, let me just debunk the story. You're not trying to debunk the fear in a sense or ignore the fear. You can feel the fear. It's better to feel the fear and say, okay, if that happens, the most worst thing in the world, if that actually is what I'm fearing here, because you're going to know what the fear is associated with, the story is associated with, by what you're thinking about when the fear comes up. Right? If it's around financial ruin and you have all this fear coming up, that's going to be the story you're playing. That's going to be kind of the movie role you're going to play. And that's what is encompassing, in a sense, that fear. So when you're releasing that fear and you're letting all that fear come up, people will do it lots of different ways. Some people will go right into the fear and just feel the whole thing and feel the fear and go through the whole process. People who fear death, they'll go through the whole process of them picturing out, feeling out that reality of, okay, let's just go through my whole death scene in a sense. Let me just feel through that. Let me walk through that in a sense. And then am I still going to be afraid of it on the other side? Okay, if your fear's around financial ruin, let me just walk through what would that look like? And is it really that bad? Debunk the story. The story is more important than the fear itself. The fear is just a byproduct of the story. Just like if you have a story that makes you sad, or you have a story that makes you happy, the story is what triggers the emotion, what triggers whatever it is. That's more important. Even if we have a story around being happy, it's still, the story is what we want to get to, because the only one that tells the story is our human aspect tells the story. And a lot of people will say, well, if I'm happy, wouldn't I want to feed the story? Because that's what makes me happy. But if we have a story attached to any emotion, then we have a dependency on that story, right? We want to separate the two out. Because if we have a story around being happy, this job makes me happy, this person makes me happy, me being in this surroundings makes me happy. When we start anchoring that emotion to anything in the outside world, then we're now construing it all again. We're now distorting it, because now we're trying to kind of ground it into something that you're going to be shown it's not true. Because the story itself just triggers what we hold inside of us. It doesn't create it. The story of us being afraid of something, the story itself doesn't create the fear. It just unearths the fear to be cleared. The same thing with happiness. The person that we might think, okay, that makes me happy. The person itself has nothing to do with being happy. It just activates that emotion. Because if we never activate those emotions, the joy, the bliss, the happiness, we don't know what that is. Peace is another one we'll get a lot more into. Tranquility, beauty. When those things, those feelings get activated, those emotions get activated, we want to tie them to something. Your human just immediately wants to have a cause and effect. It's the way our human mind works. It's the way the human aspect likes to correlate it. The human aspect, it doesn't have the capacity to go beyond A plus B equals C. Where the more of your soul you start to embody, the more of the aspects you embody, you start to realize that A and G and F and Z, they're all correlated, but A and B equaling C, that's not true. That's a story we've told ourselves to make us believe that's what's true. Just like we thought. And this is where we get to the downfall of a lot of when the human stuff starts to kind of fade away for us. When we realize that thing really didn't make me happy, or maybe a different way to say that is, that thing didn't keep me happy. That thing made me happy for a little while, and now I'm not happy anymore, right? So what's going on? I thought that was the thing. So our humans always looking for the thing, right? Because the story is that that's what makes us happy. This makes us happy. The biggest fallacy of all, the money makes you happy. Which isn't true. Money might make you more comfortable. Money might make you not have to stress over certain things. It makes it easier. Never makes you happy. But when we start having these very distorted correlations of things, and we start trying to tie one thing to an emotion, then we start to, when we see it unravel, it's very disheartening for us. And that's why a lot of people start going into different spirituality routes to figure out, why is that not working? Why does that not make me happy? Why all of a sudden that used to, now it's not? Because once we achieve it, the human body itself, until we raise the human body to a certain vibration, it can't hold happiness anyway. It can hit it, but it can't hold it. So what will start to happen is, as our vibration increases, we can hit it more and hold it longer. But until we start getting into a very high vibration of our body itself, we start to raise the vibration of the body, we really don't get to really change our set point. And a human body is going to set in the 300s. That means any emotion that registers above that can't be held by the human body. So it can't be held for long. Now, there's different reasons. There's a zillion reasons why we get something and we realize, that doesn't make us happy. So I do want to loop this back to fear, but it is all correlated as to how we'll do things. It's just kind of the opposite, right? Like when something happens that we really feared, and holy shit, it just happened. And a lot of people say, well, I knew it was going to happen. I feared it and it happened. Well, it also attracts it quicker. The minute we try to ignore that we fear something, because that thing is going to trigger the fear to release from the body. That thing is what our body needs to release that amount of fear. So normally the thing we fear the most is what is going to start to transpire, because that's what we're basically telling our universe we need to clear the body. We're always trying to get the body cleaner, whether we're doing it through what we're putting our body through as far as our diet and what we're air quality and water quality and what we're putting in our body. It also has to do with cleaning inside out of the body. It's not just outside in. We also have to clean up the emotions in the body. So anything of that denser vibration has to go, and fear has a denser vibration. It has to go, right? It has to leave the body. So when we're in a lot of these situations, and we think, okay, I just had that. Why? I knew that was going to happen because I feared it so much. The thing we fear the most normally will take place because we want to believe we don't fear it. We don't want to deal with the fear itself. We want to go with the facility that the fear is not really real. Fear is real. The story's not real, right? So normally what happens is we go through some of these situations and then we don't fear that anymore. You get to certain things, well, once it happens, you're like, well, hell, now I'm not afraid of it because I've been through it 10 times, no matter what it was. Whether it was, okay, I have a fear that, I'm going to lose my house. Well, okay, so that happened. Now, okay, so now I don't have that really fear anymore. It worked through the fear of that, and now I don't have the fear of all these things happening because they already took place. They don't have that hold on you anymore. They don't have the control anymore to keep you doing certain things to kind of feed the fear. But we get to a certain point in our ascension process where if you want to call it more of an enlightened state, when you get into higher consciousness, you can start to feel that, do I have to have it happen? Can I just work through the fear? Walk through the fear of that happening. Get okay with it happening if that's how it's going to be. If that's the highest line thing it's going to be, then okay. It's not my preference. And I've had that discussion with my universe lots of times. I mean, that's not how I want it to go down. But if that's the highest line thing and that's what we're going to do, then that's what it's going to be. But is it not my preference? I'd rather it go down a different way. I'd rather us not have to do it that way. But if that's the way we have to do it, then that's why we have to do it. Open communication with your body, with your universe, to say that. And really acknowledge what you fear. And not be ashamed of what we fear. Fear triggers shame. That we shouldn't be afraid of that. A lot of the organized religions will say, oh, you shouldn't be afraid of death. So it constructs all of these different stories around death so people aren't afraid of them. They try to and control behavior by a lot of this stuff. And it's not just religion is one you will see quite a bit, but it's everything. Healthcare system is the same way. They're still human systems. No matter what the intention, the minute our human aspect gets control of it, it now becomes a distorted karmic timeline. And a lot of people will say, well, this is a little sidetrack, but I do want to mention this. Well, if we talk about everything being predestined, right? We talk about everything being predestined in certain timelines. You switch a timeline, you change what's going to unravel in that timeline. So if we keep changing all that stuff, and we get to certain timelines where if I was supposed to act a certain way in that timeline, and I did because that was my contract to do that, well, am I racking up karma? I just fulfilled what I said I was going to do. So why do I going to get punished for that in a sense? Well, we agree to take on the karma. That's kind of the thing about all the soul contracts. And that's why when people do certain things, people would say to us, but really they're for us to clear more things, for us to see more things, for us to continue to raise our vibration, that when we start going through a lot of that stuff, we kind of look at it as a kind of the victim mentality, which then starts to clear a lot of the victim mentality out of our body. But we still take on karma when we play out those roles. I mean, we get to a certain point where we understand that, and we don't participate in those contracts anymore because we shift them to more of agreements on what we're going to do. And we change the frequency of which we do them in. All our soul contracts are done because we didn't know that's what we agreed to do. We just sort of show up and that's what we do. We're matching an aspect of them. We're playing the villain in the story. We're doing these, what some people would look at some things that either we have done or others have done as though it's terrible that those things were done. But they're all agreed to in advance. But it doesn't mean the karma is not taken on. It's just we agree to take it on. That's why I say when you get into different relationships with people, you agree to take on their karma. So when we start to understand how that works, we're very picky about what we do and what we don't do and who we do bring into our life every day. And if our agreement is to take on that karma and help clear that karma along with our own karma that we're clearing, to kind of tip the scales. That's why when we're doing a lot of, different sharings, different work on a soul level, it feels like it takes forever for anything to really start to show, because we have to go back and we have to cancel out everything we've ever done from a perspective of, from our human perspective, from our human aspect, everything we did in every lifetime. So we're trying to balance all those karmic scales, and that takes some time. It is not something where we do one nice thing and, oh, okay, my scales are balanced. It's just one more beat on the abacus in a sense. So we're not really getting to a major breakthrough until we get a lot of beads on that one side, because everything we've ever done in our human aspect is just creating more and more stuff for us to untangle. So the more we really recognize the stories we tell ourselves, the emotion we attach to the story, because on the one side where something triggers happiness, we would feel like, from a human perspective, that's going to have an outcome we're going to want, right? And then we think of something that triggers fear. Well, I'm not going to enjoy that outcome because I'm going to trigger all this fear. Normally it's reversed. Normally once we get to the outcome, we're kind of either on the happy side disappointed because it doesn't keep us happy forever. It keeps us happy for a little while. And then we want to go on to the next thing. We want the next rush of happiness, right? We kind of get addicted to the feeling of that. We get addicted to the joy of that. We get addicted to what that feels like. So we keep kind of going down that path. But we get more disillusioned because we keep trying to attach it to something kind of staying around to keep us there, not understanding that every time we have something that triggers happiness within us, we have it anyway. We're honing our frequency more. We're raising our vibration. We're honing our frequency more to that happy frequency. And the more we do that, the more our body vibration raises so we can hold it longer. But the frequency we're holding, as that increases, we kind of get to a set point where the highs aren't as high and the lows aren't as low. And when we start really kind of looking at our sort of, I'll see a lot of people call it like an emotional code. I'm going to use that word here, but it's not the same emotional code I'm sure you're going to see on a lot of different videos. We start kind of looking at what's going on here. We start to, your body's going to set at a different point. You don't get the highs and the lows anymore, because your body is not in such a low point anymore, right? So the highs feel so high and amazing because they're so different than where your body is setting at, the frequency of your body, that you don't feel that anymore. So as you start continuing going through things, you don't keep hitting that same high with it anymore, because your body is just naturally setting at a higher frequency. And we start to dissociate the things as to being important to be there, right? Why you have things start to change. You know, we don't have things for the same reasons anymore. We have them because it can contribute to the work we're doing. We have it because it contributes to how we feel as far as it supports our vibration. We have it for different reasons, but we don't have it for the human reasons. We don't really get so much bogged down by the humanness of why we have certain things. When we start decoding our human choices and why we wanted stuff and what we did with the stuff we had, it all centered around us. Whereas when you start shifting that and you start embodying in more of your soul and seeing, it's more you just start to see the bigger picture, and you understand that I can't stay so solid and just it's all about me. Now, for a while, it's going to be just about you, because it never was about us to begin with, right? The human existence is a very tricky. It's very tricky on how it works, because it makes us think it's all about us when really we're not doing anything for us, right? Everything we're doing is just kind of keeping us in that human mold, in a sense. You know, it's not really taking us out of that. It keeps us very much structured in that human mold, because we have a fear of leaving that's one of the biggest fears when we start to deconstruct, or really they just start to fade away, all of our human existences, and they start to go and fade, and we start to shift out of them, you know, and they just fade away. And we start to have to figure out, what do I want to create that's not human existence related? We spend a lot of time, and we talk a lot about on this channel about trying to take those higher line realities and mush them together, you know, with what our human would have wanted. And then that doesn't work, and we don't really understand why that's not really working, because we're trying to bring two different things together that aren't going to really work, because the energy we come from is so different. But then you see people take that to the other extreme, where it's like, oh, well, then you just don't have any possessions when you're doing, you know, you're embodying in your soul or doing soul work. And for a while, I would say we don't have as much as we maybe had prior, for a lot of us, because we have to learn the value of things. As a human, we don't have a value of things. And you know, you took a, what? I mean, it depends on where you start when you're supposed to start your ascension or your awakening process. But if you took, you know, 25, 35, 45, 55, 65 years to build a human life, not to mention all your existences going on simultaneously, where you're living in a human existence, from that aspect. And you've got to completely retool all that. And could that take 5 to 7 years? Yeah, but it took 45 to 50 or whatever, whatever we're kind of auto-correcting in a sense, to build your human life. So when you try to compare the two, it's not anywhere near as long, but it doesn't happen overnight. Anyone who tells you it happens overnight, they're still living in a human existence and they don't even realize it. They haven't transitioned over yet because it can't happen overnight. Too much stuff has to shift within the body. Too much stuff has to shift within the situations we're put in, because we have to release all that fear. You have to get, and you're still going to always be releasing fear, but we have to get a majority of that out of our body before we can even embody in more of a soul to go to the next phase of our ascension journey, go to the next phase of what a lot of people call the light body, which is really just the soul body. Just start to feel our energy field and to start to be able to pick up everything in our field and not be so constricted with just being in our human existence and seeing just one thing. We have to be able to open ourselves up to more. But the biggest thing that's going to keep us there is the fear of leaving. We have a huge fear of leaving and everything that's going to happen when we leave. And from my experience, and I can only speak from mine, nothing really happens. All those fears are really pretty much not really real in a sense. That they're just stories we create. The fear itself needed to clear, but the story I had about what was going to happen when I left and the fear that got released, none of those stories were true. We have to debunk the story. It's kind of like you have to look at it like going into a haunted house, which technically there are no haunted houses, but going into a haunted house where we're really just seeing energy. That's all it is. I like when people use the word entities because it gives us something power that really does. It's just different aspects of ourselves, different things we're transcending. We just kind of give it a form, just like when people see aliens. It's the same kind of thing. We have galactic aspects. We start seeing things outside of us because to us we're so separated from that. We're still not the galactic aspect of ourselves yet, so we see it as something else. Every time I see all that stuff about aliens and people saying, I'm like, well, of course you see them. You see them like you see anything else. They're just an aspect of you. We just are so separated from that and have so much fear around that. The fear also keeps us separated from embodying in those aspects of ourselves. And really embracing what a lot of people call our galactic origins or our galactic roots. I always think it's funny when people say, oh, when will aliens come? I'm like, we're already here. It's just part of your DNA. It just hasn't been activated in a sense where you can really remember all of those existences you had as galactic beings. Now, I don't get too much into galactic stuff here. There are a lot of people that go really into it. A lot of people go into the galactic races, and it's fun to explore them, and it's a pivotal part of your ascension journey just to get through the fear of that. Just to get through the fear of understanding that in a sense, they're in a way they are part of you, and they're part of who we are. But there's so much fear around that. So, and you constantly see, it's always depicted in movies, and even not in a movie, it's depicted as so much fear around that, when it's just us. So, look at what you really fear. Look at what really triggers it for you, and what you are like, oh gosh, if that happened, and look at the story you have around what would happen if that happened. Walk yourself through the experience. Clear the fear. See, okay, can you get to a place where, okay, if that actually took place, yeah, I'd be okay. Because once we can get there and start debunking the story, that's when we clear the fear. Ignoring it, saying it doesn't exist, it's not helping us. Clearing it, acknowledging it, not being ashamed of it, that's what gets you to the next level. Being able to look at the story you have to realize that's just a story. It's no different than a movie I watched yesterday. It's got, it's no different. It's the same exact thing. So I'm almost at that witching hour, so I do want to open up my chat and see. Okay, it's quiet today. I want to think if there's anything else I want to bring in here. I'm going to do a separate video on this, I think, at some point, but I do want to kind of touch a little bit on another big fear. We have the fear of death, which is massive. When you start leaving your human existences behind and start trying to build, and I'm going to say trying to build because at the beginning we don't know how to do that, so we still have this Mod Podge. I think a Lego world of some soul-aligned things, some human-aligned things, and we're trying to make it all mush together. Doesn't really work, but we keep trying. You try to bring everything together. So we have a lot of these kind of things mushed together. We fear the change. We don't like change. And anyone who says they do, they are okay with a little change here, a little change there. They're okay maybe changing their hair. They're not okay with the big changes. When you start having to redesign your template, redesign your life out of a human existence, which means you cannot be supported by any of the human support systems, whether that be religion, health, politics. It doesn't matter what it is. Anything that's playing in those human realities that supports the human aspects, you can't play in them. And that does mean for a while you don't have to coexist in them. A lot of people think that means, oh, well, then you don't exist in a money system. Well, as long as there's a money system, you have to play the game of the money game, right? Until that system collapses. And I do feel the next 3 years, that's a lot of what we started to see. The last 3 years prior, you were in the COVID years where you saw a lot of the health stuff get rearranged and changed, and people started shifting on what they believed was true and what they didn't believe was true. And now I feel like you're going to go through that with some of the financial systems getting rearranged. But you learn to kind of play the game, in a sense, without feeding the system. And that's going to probably not make a lot of sense. But you're going to start to learn how to kind of pick it apart a little bit and understand that, yeah, as long as there's a money system, I have to charge money for what I do. That's how that's going to work. As long as, there is... But there are some systems you can't play in, right? Like we can't play in, really after a while you don't play in any political stuff at all. Because you realize it's just a very separation tactic. You start to see the separation and everything. You just don't play in any of that stuff anymore. You remove yourself from those worlds. You remove yourself and you only have what's going to support you in those worlds. So even when you look at, we can't participate in the credit system anymore, right? Everything has to be on cash. A credit system is a very distorted human system, so we can't participate in that. So we have to kind of move ourselves away from that. And that might be gradual. It might be all of a sudden. There are certain things you're just not able to do. And those are the changes when I say our human is going to have a bigger fear of what does it look like? Because we can't really fathom what it looks like. But the only way we get there and start moving toward that direction is everything in the human existence has to start to fade away. That's not a failure of what we created. It's a transition. We always look at change as being a failure, like, oh, I did this and now I failed because it didn't work. Well, it's supposed to work. Because we didn't get the human ending we wanted, we feel like, oh my God, I'm a failure. It didn't work. It wasn't going to work. It was never designed to work. It wasn't built to work. That's not how our human systems are not really built to do anything. They're not built to last. That's just not how they were constructed to begin with. They were never constructed to persevere. They're constructed to push us to something else when they start to fade away, when they no longer serve a purpose, where us staying in those realms, or us staying in those human realities doesn't assist us anymore. So, okay, I think that's good for today. All right, I'll see everyone next time. Bye.